Daisy, remember when I had lots of friends? Late night fist fights, we thought that this would never end. Daisy, remember when I said I'd make it some.
Alright, so I just posted on my Insta stories for people to put in their questions and respond back to the Insta story about what they'd like me to cover in this part 3 of the Gentle Parenting series. It's very loud in the background because Elvis has his neighbor friends over and they're playing games. So I'm just going to look over those comments and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to talk about. Also, if you haven't already, please watch my part 1 and part 2 of my Gentle Parenting series because it's likely that I've already answered your question in the part 1 and part 2. That is where I answered like the most common questions and I share my book recommendations as well as 4 tips for a peaceful family dynamic, which kind of ends up answering a lot of questions. But I'm gonna specifically devote this video to topics that I haven't answered in the first 2 videos. So if you don't already, please follow me on Instagram at Ellen Fisher, where you can see a lot more of what I post, and I oftentimes post my thoughts about gentle parenting or just how our parenting is going as well. Alright, I'm gonna drink a smoothie, look at the comments.
It's a shame my love was not enough.
Thanks for joining me again on this Gentle Parenting series part 3. If you have not already, please watch part 1 and part 2 where I go more in depth about gentle parenting and just like cover the groundwork of it, so check that out. So I'm really excited to get into part 3 of this series, not only just because it's a passionate topic of mine, but because it's a wonderful reminder for me to just sit down and talk out these things that a lot of people have questions about for gentle parenting. And just by me saying it over again helps remind me in my daily life and practice as being a gentle mom. Alright, so for this gentle parenting video, I just gathered the most common questions that people asked and ones I wanted to answer, and I'll just be answering that now. So the first topic I wanted to cover is sibling conflict, sibling arguments, and how to handle those situations. And now that Sandy's a bit older, they're starting to argue more, and just I'm getting some experience from that and what's working, what helps. I think I'll just give like the main points that I feel like have really helping them build a strong relationship to where they communicate kindly. So they already have a really great bond, but they definitely still argue and fight and hit and scream, and it's a learning journey for them. Sandy's 2 years old. It's something else that I talk about in my other videos, is to remind yourself of your children's brain development, that their brains still have a lot of developing to do, and to be gentle and kind and empathetic towards their learning journey on how to process and explain their emotions calmly. And another thing to remind yourself as well is that don't we as adults ourselves have trouble sometimes as well with adult relationships, like with your partner? So that can just help you to be empathetic and not feel like you need to stamp out your child's humanity, right? Actually, there's a quote I wanted to read, which I read in my part 1 of my Gentle Parenting series, but I want to read it again because it's such a powerful quote that helps kind of like just start off the video really well. So it's a quote by Rebecca Eanes. So often, children are punished for being human. Children are not allowed to have grumpy moods, bad days, disrespectful tones, or bad attitudes, and yet we adults have them all the time. We think if we don't nip it in the bud, it will escalate and we will lose control. Let go of that unfounded fear and give your child permission to be human. We all have days like that, and none of us are perfect. And we must stop holding our children to a higher standard of perfection than we can attain ourselves. All of the punishments you could throw at them will not stamp out their humanity, for to err is human and we all do it sometimes. So I think this quote is really relevant to handling sibling conflicts, because if we can take a step back and realize that sometimes we have conflicts with people in our life as well, and then establish the difference that like your children have only been in the world for a few years, however many years in the world, and still have a ton of brain development to do and a ton of developing with learning how to handle their emotions. So it makes sense why there's going to be conflicts when they don't get things that they want, or just conflicts in general with relationships. We are here to help guide them and share these experiences with them. So my number 1 tip is to help foster positive experiences with them as siblings together. So examples of this would be very simple things. Simply getting involved with playing with them can help facilitate things in a lot easier way. Obviously we cannot be there 100% of the time when they're playing a game or whatever, but by suggesting a game that you think they'll both like, giving them each a task and how to get it done. Like let's say they want to build a big tower with their blocks, and then you help them with that and say, okay, here's your blocks and here's your blocks. Let's see if we can build something together. Elvis, you build, I'm just using my children's names. Elvis, you build the first layer, Sandy build the second layer, and then Elvis will build the third, and you go back and forth. And just by helping them go back and forth, it helps show them that they can play together by taking turns, and that creates more peace as opposed to just like wreaking havoc, like throw the toys on the ground and try to build something, and then they all end up grabbing each other's toys. So, and then when there is an issue, you help resolve it with them. So that is part of the second tip, which is to help them use their words in times when they're having big emotions. So let's take that same example. They're playing with blocks together, and one of them grabs a block from the other person's hand, or one of them takes all the blocks and then the other child doesn't get any of the blocks, and that child is upset by that, obviously, and they just aren't sure how to express that. It depends on the age. Obviously, if you have older children, there's going to be different ways to handle sibling rivalry, but this works really well in regards to my 6-year-old with my 2.5-year-old, and I think it would work really well for any age under there, or even up to a couple years over that, because sometimes I'll handle conflicts with Elvis and his older neighbor friends who are like 7 or 8, 9 years old, and by just talking to Elvis through it helps him learn how to respond, like how to communicate in an effective way that's calm and loving. Let's say Elvis grabs a toy from Sandy's hand and Sandy starts screaming on the top of his lungs. I'm gonna look him in the eye and say, Sandy, can you use your words calmly? Tell Elvis, say, I don't like that. Or you can say, Elvis, please stop that. Or another example is, Elvis, please give it back, and show, like, give them different examples on what they can say instead of screaming. And then just kind of talk them through it, touch them lovingly, calmingly talk to them. And on the other end, we need to talk to Elvis as well for taking the toy out of his hand. I generally talk to Elvis by explaining, like, you know, if you just ask Sandy for the toy that you want, he's very likely to share it with you. Because Sandy actually really loves to share. He just wants to be respected and asked nicely instead of like you yanking something out of his hand, like understandably. So yeah, so just reminding Elvis, please use your words, like talk calmly to Sandy, and by using your words, you're teaching him how to communicate as well, because you're the big brother. You get to show him how to be calm and loving, and that gives him a sense of responsibility, which is the third suggestion. Once I help Sandy calm down, then I can talk to Elvis. The third tip is to give examples that help your child put themselves in the other person's shoes. So I would say, hey Elvis, how would it feel if Sandy took something out of your hand? Would you like that? And then he's always like, no. I'm like, what would you want him to do instead? Would you like him to ask you if he can have it? So another example is, let's say Sandy's doing something he shouldn't, like kicking around Elvis's toys when he's trying to build something special, which does happen. Like Elvis will be setting up this cool like Lego army thing and towers and stuff like that, and Sandy might come by and kind of knock it over and mess it up. And so Elvis has worked really hard on this, and he's frustrated and he's so mad, and he might be like, that makes me so mad, and then just like hit Sandy or throw a Lego at Sandy, something like that. So I'll come over to Elvis and say, Elvis, I totally get that. That's so frustrating. You're working so hard on these Legos. Let me help you communicate to him effectively that is calm and loving. And then he's like, no, I'm so mad. He messed up my Legos. So then I'll flip it around and say, okay, think about all the times when you're doing something that you aren't supposed to be doing, and me and Daddy come in to have you stop doing something you're not supposed to do. And I say, like, how would that make you feel if we threw something at you when you were doing something you weren't supposed to do? Would that teach you to not do that thing again, or would it make you just mad and want to throw something back? And he's like, yeah, that would make me mad and want to throw something back. Then that helps him see very clearly, once he places himself in the opposite shoes of what just happened, like, okay, yeah, maybe throwing something at Sandy isn't gonna help. Like, that doesn't make anything better, and that's hurtful, and that doesn't feel good inside to the person that you're doing it to. So even though Sandy was doing something he shouldn't be doing, I expressed to Elvis, like, to use his words calmly to Sandy, and if that still doesn't help, to ask for my help or Dad's help, or we'll come in and help him make sure that Sandy doesn't mess up his toys that he's working on. And in that case, because Sandy is so much younger and has a lot more learning to do in regards to what's acceptable and what's not, even more so than Elvis does, I'll simply remove Sandy from the situation. I'll take him into another room, or take him on the couch, or lay on the bed with him for a time in, which I talk about in, I think it's part 1 of my gentle parenting series. So I'll take Sandy in the other room, and I'll talk to him calmly about how it's not okay to mess up what Elvis is working on, and then I'll just find him something else to do instead. And I'll say, okay, here, why don't you make your own Lego tower out of these Legos or out of this toy, that type of thing. And if the child is a lot younger, like 1 year old, 1.5, all you need is redirection for a younger child. Once they're getting to about Sandy's age, about 2 and 2.5, it definitely helps to talk to them a little bit more and explain what they can do instead, and if they want some of Elvis's toys, ask calmly, that type of thing. But before the age, which you'll be able to discern for yourself with your child, even now, sometimes I just redirect Sandy, a lot of times, you know, so that, okay, let's redirect him towards something else that will help him feel happier now. It just depends on the situation. So my last tip for promoting peaceful sibling relationships is to give the older siblings certain responsibilities to help out with their younger siblings. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're in charge of something for the younger siblings, but it's more just like giving them ways to help out with their younger brother or sister. It helps them feel empowered and confident. It also helps the older sibling see how good it feels to treat their younger sibling kindly and with love. And in return, the younger sibling will respect and trust the older sibling more. So an example of this that I have is that Elvis has actually prepared meals for Sandy before. When Sandy is like, comes up to me and he's asking for avocado, but I'm in the middle of something else, I'll say, Elvis, would you like to make a meal for Sandy? Would you like to get Sandy sliced avocado and put it on a plate for him? And he's like, yeah, because, you know, it empowers him to feel like he has the ability to do big people things. So when we give them that opportunity, it makes him feel really good and he wants to do it. And we have these nylon kid safe knives. It's just super great. You can just Google nylon kid knives and you shouldn't have a problem finding them. So if I'm in the middle of something, Sandy really wants some avocado, there's a moment there where Elvis gives Sandy what he needs and what he wants. He's hungry and Elvis is preparing food for him, and that makes Sandy feel really loved. He sits up on the counter on the table and watches Elvis get the avocado ready for him. He's even made him like banana with almond butter on top before, and then he'll ask Sandy like, what else would you like on it? Would you like some raisins on top of this? They communicate in a kind way from which Elvis has seen from modeled behavior through the way me and Andrew treat Sandy, talking to Sandy calmly and kindly and asking Sandy what he would like in his food and that type of thing. So then the moment comes where Elvis finishes preparing a meal for Sandy and he brings it over to the table for Sandy, and that feels so good for both of them, because then Elvis realizes, wow, it feels really good to be kind because look how happy my brother is. And as a result, Sandy is so much more likely to listen to Elvis when Elvis is trying to communicate him through other areas in regards to, oh, Sandy, it's time to clean our room up now. Will you help me clean the room? And then Sandy is so much more likely to listen to Elvis because Elvis is listening to him through giving him food that he asked for. Does that make sense? So obviously it's different for every age and in regards to siblings, but generally the older sibling, even if they're only 3 or 4 years old and you have a younger sibling from there, you can ask the older sibling to help out with very simple things that they can at least attempt to do, and just by encouraging them and allowing them to be a part of the taking care of the younger one can be really helpful, I think, in regards to creating sibling bonds and helping the older child to treat the younger child with kindness. So another example would be like if you're changing the younger child's diaper, and then you can ask your older child, hey, will you go get an outfit for your little sister or for your little brother? And then they can go into the room and pick out an outfit for their little sister, and then they feel empowered by getting to choose what their little 6-month-old baby sister or brother gets to wear. So that's another example as well. Actually, I don't know if you watched my Insta stories, but a couple weeks ago, Elvis really wanted to put Sandy's pajamas on. And Sandy's like, he's a big kid now, he's like over 2, but we still help put Sandy's clothes on, like his pajamas and his pants and his long sleeve shirt before bed, because it's like been cold at night. They were getting such a kick out of it. They were laughing so hard and jumping on the bed, and like Elvis was trying to put a shirt on Sandy, and Sandy was just loving it. Like he just thought it was so funny that his older brother was trying to put his clothes on, and it was really hard for Elvis to try to figure out how to get like an arm that wasn't his own arm into a sleeve, and it was just so adorable.
Good boy, you do. Stick it out, feet. So little socks. So little for my age. I need like huge socks. It's like as big as my ankle. With my motion. Hey, hey! Sandy! Hey, let me see. Okay, it's okay, but Cindy, it's okay. Not her. Hey, put your arm. Bring it out.
So those types of experiences can really help children bond and want to play nicely well together. That being said, it's not always perfect, it's not always rainbows with them, and that's just totally normal, because let's just be honest guys, it isn't always perfect in rainbows and sunshine with your partner or with your friends. Like, I don't know about you, but me and Andrew, we have our tough moments too. And so just being empathetic and understanding that it's totally okay for your siblings to have conflicts, and we can simply take this as a lesson. If you are with a partner, your behavior that you model for them is the #1 most important thing, especially as they get older. As they become older and older, they see how to treat other people based on how you treat your partner and how your partner treats you. So it's so important that you model positive behavior with them. And another thing is too that I've found really helpful is that when you have an argument with your partner, it's okay for your children to see that you're disagreeing on something, but something to be really mindful of, not just for your own benefit of your relationship with your partner, but also for your children, is to see how you handle disagreements. Do you stay calm? Do you stay kind in your words? Is your body language kind? Are you collected? So that shows them that, oh, you can have a disagreement with someone, and this is how you can act, as opposed to just screaming, yelling, slamming doors. It's a learning experience just by them seeing how do you handle disagreements with another adult. It doesn't even just have to be a partner, but it could be with any other adult. And then at the very end too, Andrew and I are always super careful to make sure that if our children do see us having a disagreement or an argument, that they always also see us making up. So like, let's say we don't make up right away, we are sure to make up in front of our children so that they can see how we apologize to each other and hug, and that there is amends are always made. I've really found that helps with Elvis, especially now that he's 6. He's like a lot older and a lot more mature than he was at like 2.5, obviously. He is so likely now when he makes a mistake to come and apologize when he's ready. If you want your children to apologize when they make mistakes, then we should also be very good at apologizing to our own children, to them, when you make a mistake, because none of us are perfect. Sometimes we're gonna lose our cool and make mistakes. And by me coming up to Elvis when I made a mistake and by saying, you know, Elvis, I'm so sorry, I totally lost my cool there and yelled, I should not have done that, I should have talked to you calmly, can you forgive me? That says so much to them. That speaks volumes and makes them feel so respected, for one, and for two, that shows them that, hey, my mom apologizes to me when I make a mistake, I can apologize to her when I make a mistake. And so he's so much more likely to apologize to us when we're willing to be vulnerable and apologize as well. If you're a parent with older children, feel free to put down examples on how you help create sibling bonds, help engage them to have a loving connection with less arguments. I mean, I had tons of arguments with my sister Hannah when we were younger. We argued all the time. But I will say we were like the best of friends ever, and now we of course are like she's like my life. She is my best friend. But at the end of the day, having boundaries with your children is super important. You know, like I said, there's a big difference between gentle parenting and passive parenting. Passive parenting would be just, you know, yelling across the room or saying across the room, hey, stop, don't hit your brother, stop, don't do that, stop, don't do that. And I totally understand there are times when you're in the middle of something and it's really hard to facilitate what's happening with your kids arguing and then what you're doing on the other side of the room. So it's not always going to be perfect, and I do talk about this in my other videos. Gentle parenting includes respectful ways to communicate and being firm but loving in your response. So boundaries are super important. Hitting is not allowed in our family. Calling names is not allowed in this family. It's a rule. So when those things are happening, helping to get involved and help them use their words to communicate calmly does wonders. But if they're having an argument where they're talking or you kind of hear their voices being raised, I do think that there's a balance in regards to letting your children working it out. It also depends on the age difference and what ages they're at, but a lot of times you will find that it's beneficial to let them work it out themselves and interfering when something which is against the rules starts happening. So the next thing I want to talk about is something someone asked with, how do you handle when you and your partner disagree with how to parent? I feel like that could be a whole video in and of itself, because Andrew and I definitely disagree from time to time on how to parent, and it can be very tough. And I can only imagine how tough it would be if your whole philosophy of parenting differed, because that would just make it extremely hard. But what I've found with the times when we do in specific situations feel like it should be handled differently, we kind of have this kind of unspoken way of handling things where whoever was there and saw what happened is the person that is going gonna handle how it goes. Now sometimes I'll like hear things happening and hearing things the way it happened, and I'm thinking, oh, that's not what I would do. I wouldn't handle it that way. I feel like that could be done differently. There's been times where I've jumped in and been like, no, like this shouldn't happen this way, but I feel like that creates a lot of disrespect in regards to the way children see us as parents co-parenting together. So we try our very best to just like let the other parent handle it, and at the end, if you really disagreed with how it happened, talk about it afterwards, after the kids go to bed, or in a moment where you're by yourselves. We found over time that we're much more peaceful and willing to listen to each other's opinions on how to handle things if we wait till after the conflict is resolved and just wait till we can talk alone in private. So yeah, that's something that we are working on, because we definitely have our moments like this. But let's say you just disagree fundamentally on how to raise your children. I would just suggest asking your partner very kindly to read a gentle parenting book that you found very helpful. And if they really don't want to, I would say you can either suggest mutually by saying, hey, what if you read a book that I suggest on parenting, and then I'll read a book that you suggest on parenting, and then we can discuss them afterwards. So that's an idea. And then my other thing I'd like to say is that by simply being the best example you can be as a parent is what I find like to be the most helpful. So maybe your partner thinks that you shouldn't handle it in a certain way, or else it'll go sour and it's not going to be helpful to your children's development. But by him seeing you in action through being a good example, he sees the way you're treating your child respectfully and kindly, but also firmly and having boundaries. Your partner can easily see how, oh, okay, so you are actually following through with your boundaries, but you're being very kind and there's no yelling involved. Maybe your partner can get on board with that by seeing how boundaries are still followed through. That's just a couple tips for that. So I think I'm only going to answer one more in this video, because I just end up talking so much. There's so much to say. How do you handle children interrupting conversations and interrupting adult conversations, which I thought was a very interesting question. I really like that question. There's a few things we can say with that help with things. For one, being a good example, like I always am saying, you know, when your children are talking to you or to anyone, to be mindful to not interrupt them. Children are people now, not later, not when they get older. They want to be respected and loved just like we do. So when your children are talking, be mindful to not interrupt them as well. Be mindful to look them in the eye, engage with them, and listen to them. I try really hard not to interrupt him or say what I think he's trying to say, and just let him finish. But something that I think is probably the most important aspect is to think about how children feel when a bunch of adults or a couple adults are in a room. So when we're having adult conversations, I think it's also really important for us to not disregard what your children want to say and try our best to include them in the conversations. And also, I find it helpful that if I'm telling a story about the day, to not talk about my children in the third person, but to include them and say, yeah, Elvis, remember when you did this today? Wasn't that funny? Like, why don't you tell them? And then he feels included, like we're including him in the conversation, like if I'm telling Andrew something. But let me just give a specific example that I find this question to be the most relatable for me. I have a really good friend named Sarah Triglia, and we always have so much to talk about. We always have like these endless, like conversations are endless. We could literally talk for like 12 hours if we had the chance, but we are constantly interrupted, not by just like your children interrupting your conversation, but by just we're in the middle of a conversation and then my son and her daughter start arguing, and so our conversation is interrupted, right? So what we found really helpful is this: when we have a play date together, we say beforehand, like, okay, we're gonna focus on our kids today, not on our own relationship, because actually her daughter and my son have a really hard time. Their personalities conflict a lot, so we have to be super mindful with playing and helping them communicate, focusing a majority of our efforts on playing with our children and including them in our conversation, including them in games, and play with them. So that's what we try to do, that we find really helpful for play dates. And so the thing is, that doesn't mean your conversations don't matter. Of course they matter. So what we do instead is we plan times to be alone together, to where we can have our full conversation, and that really fills us up, so that the next time we have a play date, we feel like we can totally give our all to our children and engage with them and play with them. So like what we'll do is, like, once every couple weeks we'll meet at the beach, just the two of us, and walk on the beach together and talk for like 2 hours. and that gets like everything out we want to say and all the things we want to update them on, and that helps so that when we have play dates, we want to include our children in the play dates with all the conversations, because their conversations matter so much too. But of course your adult conversations matter a lot as well. So just setting aside time, if you can, to get alone conversations where your children are asleep even. Like, even if you can't get out and go on like a 2-hour date where you leave your children with a friend or your partner, sometimes if like we don't have the chance for that, we'll just talk on the phone for an hour after the kids go to bed. And I do that with my sister all the time. So yeah, don't be afraid to schedule times to have alone conversations with your friends or your partner. And when you are with your children, do your best to include them in conversation, because think about it for yourself. How does it feel for you if you're in a large group or in a room and people are having a conversation and they're not wanting to include you in the conversation? It doesn't feel very good, does it? And so of course those are the ideal situations, but that's not always how it's going to happen. And also giving them the time of day to talk as well. When you're in the middle of a conversation and let's say your child walks up to you and they're saying, like, you know, interrupting you, mommy, 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 help me with this, mommy, mommy, mommy. I'll look Elvis in the eye or Sandy and say, hey, I'm in the middle of this conversation. I'm listening to what Auntie has to say right now, but when she's done talking, I'll address what you have to say. Just 1 minute, let's listen to what she has to say. And then if they're interrupting because they want to be a part of the conversation, then that should signal to you that they are wanting to feel included, and we should do our very best to include them in the conversation, because that's how we would want to be treated as well. I'm going to stop here. I've been talking for a long time. There's definitely other questions I want to answer, which I will get to in another gentle parenting series video, and I hope you found this helpful. And I know I myself find it helpful because it honestly just helps inspire me to follow through with what I know is very helpful for our family. As always, be gentle on yourself, love your children, and when you make mistakes, it's okay. At the end of the day, it's not about being perfect. Oh, actually, let me finish off this video with another quote that can help leave you feeling a sense of peace for when you do make mistakes, because we all make mistakes. This one is by L.R. Nost. Parenting has nothing to do with perfection. Perfection isn't even the goal, not for us, not for our children. Learning together to live well in an imperfect world, loving each other despite or even because of our imperfections, and growing as humans while we grow our little humans, those are the goals of gentle parenting. So don't ask yourself at the end of the day if you did everything right. Ask yourself what you learned and how well you loved, then grow from your answer. That is perfect parenting. All right, I'm gonna leave you with that. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day with your family. Bye! The best leaders are gentle. In our culture, we have been misled to believe that the tougher we are, the more respect we will gain. But that simply is not true. What we gain by being tough is fear, and fear is not respect. Respect is gained by giving it away.
Money ain't no thing when it comes to us.